Kia ora. Look, it's a very, very great pleasure indeed to be with you this evening to launch the 9th annual review of the state of CSR in Australia and New Zealand, and the 5th in New Zealand. We started in Australia and now we've been doing New Zealand now for 5 years, but I think the relationship with the Sustainable Business Council may possibly only be in its 3rd year. That's why you had number 3. This is the 9th annual review, and really it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you all for coming to be here today together with me and also with our wonderful New Zealand partners, the Sustainable Business Council of New Zealand, Right Communications, which was the originator of bringing this project to New Zealand, and Massey University, which has been participating in this project. I think this is the 2nd year. This is the largest ongoing study of CSR practices and priorities in this part of the world. A longitudinal study of 9 years has amassed a huge amount of insight into the developing profession of corporate responsibility and sustainability and the issues that are important to business in both countries. I've titled this presentation this evening, A Golden Age of Corporate Governance, Responsibility and Sustainable Development for New Zealand, because I can't remember a time when I felt so optimistic for the outlook of CSR here in New Zealand. I'm pretty optimistic as a general rule. I'm optimistic about Australia, but I'm really optimistic about New Zealand. We had the largest response to date from New Zealand, 359 individual people, up from 224 last year, with New Zealand now accounting for 29% of the overall participation, which is absolutely awesome. We also had nearly 30% of our sample. Every year we look at an ongoing set of issues to track priority issues and what's rising and what's falling. We also have a special focus every year, and both last year and this year it was the Sustainable Development Goals. But I also have to share with you this evening some new insights on reporting, and the other top issues that companies are focusing on for the coming 12 months. This project is managed by the Australian Centre for Corporate Social Responsibility, ACCSR, through our not-for-profit arm, CSR Connected. And not-for-profit companies' aim is to contribute to the professional development of people working in CSR and to the professionalisation of the CSR management function. And this is our flagship program. We do a few other bits and pieces over the course of the year, but this is really the flagship project there. As you may know, you may be aware that the methodology for this project is based on surveys. And there are 2 ways to participate in the survey for the state of CSR. You may receive an invitation as an individual person if you're on our mailing list or the mailing list of any of our partners, particularly Sustainable Business Council. And those people are mainly working in CSR, or they're interested in CSR, and they've kind of opted in to get information. The other way to participate is via your company, and the company participation is what leads to the awarding of the CSR Top 3 in New Zealand and the CSR Top 10 in Australia. So those 359 people that participated from New Zealand came from 45 companies and organisations in New Zealand, which included 22 members of SBC. So that was an awesome achievement. Of those 45 companies in New Zealand, 8 of them participated in the State of CSR Top 3 award process and offered the survey to their employees, and were able to receive a report on their own CSR capabilities as a result of that. Those respondents came from quite a diverse range of sectors. They came from banking, transport, manufacturing, accommodation and hospitality, professional services, consumer retail, oil and gas, and a number of others. And up here, these are the combined respondents' industries from both countries. You can see also there's a bit of a skew towards large companies, but they're not indeed all large companies. Of the 8 New Zealand companies that participated in the state of CSR as companies, 3 of them made the grade for the CSR top 3. The cut-off score to be regarded as the top was 75% for CSR capabilities, and I'll tell a little bit more about that later. I'm sure you all know who those companies are by now, or you can take a good guess looking at tonight's program, or the trophies that Nikki will award in a few moments' time. But what I'd like to say is to really extend my deepest personal congratulations to the CSR top 3 companies and to all of the organisations and individuals who participated in the survey this year. It really is a credit to all of the individuals and the organisations, and to the Sustainable Business Council in particular, for providing these sorts of tools to help amplify CSR success in New Zealand. And make no mistake, New Zealand has well and truly come of age in the CSR stakes globally, judging on this year's results. There is a lot of information in the report which is available on the back table for you to pick up a copy on your way out, and is also downloadable from our website, I think from the SBC website and from Right Communications website, so if you want to share it. But what I thought I'd do tonight is just pick on 4 insights that I hope will be helpful for New Zealand organisations, and reflect a little on what the implications might be for companies both here and further afield. So the first insight is that the top CSR priority for companies in New Zealand this year is managing regulatory impacts, and 82% agreed or strongly agreed that it is a high or very high priority for their organisations. During the time we did the fieldwork earlier in the year, in February, there were submissions being called to the review of the New Zealand Stock Exchange Corporate Governance Best Practice Principles, and we certainly think that the NZX effect may be driving that very high interest in regulatory issues which we've seen this year. The next insight that I want to talk about is the surprise to me finding that mandatory sustainability reporting is so much in favour. That hasn't always been the case. We asked that question a number of years ago, and even in Australia it was the subject of a parliamentary inquiry around a decade ago, and large business by and large was saying no, we don't want sustainability reporting to be mandatory. Presumably they felt that there was a competitive advantage to be gained from their performance in reporting, and they wanted to maintain that advantage. But this is completely flipped around, and there's quite strong support, nearly 50% in New Zealand, for mandatory sustainability reporting for large companies. So we do expect to see an increase in reporting activity here in New Zealand in the next few years. We also found, we looked at some of the impacts and the benefits of sustainability reporting, and here in New Zealand 46% agreed that their reporting was helping with investor engagement, which is a much higher percentage than the proportion that agreed with that statement in Australia. So there is something about the way you're approaching sustainability reporting here in New Zealand and perhaps investor engagement that is working well, that I think Australia can take a lesson from. I'm not quite sure what the lesson is yet. I hope to discover that over the next couple of days during my visit here. And the final insight that I wanted to mention was about gender equality. This is the top global goal, the top sustainable development goal for New Zealand organisations, and I wanted to share a little bit about that. So these are my 4 reasons for optimism for New Zealand, and I want to unpack each of those a little in turn now. So, the updated New Zealand Stock Exchange Corporate Governance Code Best Practice Guidelines, I'm not sure if that's the proper title, that's what I think is the proper title, was released earlier this year and does take effect from the 1st of October 2017. It's structured around 8 principles. And Principle 1 deals with ethics, Principle 4 deals with reporting and disclosure, and Principle 6 deals with risk management. And so you really can see that sustainability thinking and attention to ESG or environmental, social and governance issues is really well threaded through these corporate governance best practice guidelines. They are operating, as I'm sure you all know, on a comply-or-explain basis. And Principle 4, in particular, discusses the role of non-financial reporting in long-term value creation and recommends that organisations use the Global Reporting Initiative framework or the Integrated Reporting Framework or some combination thereof to frame their disclosures around this. And in fact, the guidelines say there should be balanced, transparent, public disclosure which connects financial, social and environmental performance. Now this right now goes further than the Australian ASX Corporate Governance Best Practice Guidelines. It's consistent in some ways, but it does go further. And this recommendation for strengthening company disclosures on ESG, I think is a tipping point, or I hope is going to be a tipping point here in New Zealand for the maturation of sustainability reporting and integrated reporting, and that in turn is going to have, I think, a huge effect on business practice. But I will say more about that in a moment. What's happening here in New Zealand is quite consistent with global trends. There's a very handy report called the Carrots and Sticks series, some of you may be familiar with, that's published every 3 years or so, and it tracks the uptake of sustainability reporting in many countries around the world. And there's a great database at www.carrotsandsticks.net if you want to drill into any of this information in more detail. But what we can see from this is that there has been quite a steep jump in the last 3 years in the number of countries around the world that are encouraging sustainability reporting through regulation. And the level of activity of stock exchanges and financial markets is perhaps the most active area, followed by governments. So the New Zealand Stock Exchange is in very, very good company indeed by taking up these recommendations. The other top priority issues that folk in New Zealand focus on is stakeholder engagement, which is an evergreen topic. It's always at the top in Australia and here. And that really, the quality of your stakeholder engagement underpins the quality of your success in all efforts on corporate responsibility and sustainability. So that is a fundamental capability, and it is one of the capabilities that we measure in the CSR Top 3 award. So it is very pleasing to see that stakeholder engagement remains a high priority. Another top priority, though, was the rise of focusing on managing the implications of technology, the CSR implications of the digital environment, the internet. And when we started tracking this issue 6 or 7 years ago, it was right down the bottom of the list, and now it's shot up to the top of the list. And so I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes speaking about what the implications of that might be for organisations of all types by looking at 3 aspects: the sharing economy, social media policies, which no doubt every organisation in this room has one, and the issue of data security and privacy. So on the sharing economy, and I'm guessing Uber and Airbnb and all of these gigantic global companies are operating here in New Zealand as well as in Australia. And what these signify is the re-emergence of interpersonal trust rather than institutional trust as a key mediator of business transactions, a little bit like it used to be in the olden days when if you were going to do business with somebody you had to know them personally. So that personal trust is being engendered by this, which you might think sounds like a good thing when it comes to CSR, because it does carry with it the promise of enhanced social capital in communities and societies as people learn to trust complete strangers through the level of transparency and reliability of these massive technology platforms. But on the other hand, these sharing economy companies need to think very carefully, as any organisation would, about their own social and environmental and governance impacts. So, for example, Uber's powerful rideshare platform has been a threat to the taxi industry pretty much everywhere it's gone, and the livelihoods of employees in the taxi industry. Uber's also been accused of tax avoidance, and I may have even read something about Uber having problems with gender equality in its management ranks as well. We wouldn't tolerate avoidance of regulation and tax from a traditional company, so we shouldn't tolerate it from these new kind of companies either. From the social point of view, sharing economy companies carry other kinds of risks as well, like labour exploitation, because people are participating as individual contractors and take all of the risk of employment on themselves. So they have the same risks as a contractor would have in the traditional economy, but perhaps even more so because of the absence of regulation so far in this area. So the sharing economy brings with it both the CSR promise and CSR pitfalls, I guess. Same with social media. Corporate social media policies may represent a relatively unrecognised development in the institutionalisation of CSR norms and communications practices. For example, a social media policy will generally restrict what employees can say or do on social media. So that tends to fly in the face of contemporary notions of CSR as they're related to free speech and stakeholder engagement and dialogue. So putting a lid on things and guidelines around things. Furthermore, social media has got contains within it the ability to generate public discourse about irresponsible business practices. So whistleblowing can potentially be magnified through social media. So there are risks to the CSR endeavour from the rise of social media. But on the other hand, it also has enormous promise because when it's used well and effectively, it's a great way to do dialogue and to communicate positive CSR practices. So I think this is a watch this space area to see how the evolution of social media policies, particularly in large companies, plays out in the future. The final thing that I wanted to touch on was data security and privacy, which I think is at the top of every business's agenda right now, whether it's from a CSR perspective or from a regulatory perspective or from any other kind of perspective. And this, as I said, has really come from an issue that's almost been invisible 6 or 7 years ago to an issue that is front and centre today. A study in 2011 in the journal Business Ethics, a European review, estimated that only a small proportion of the largest global IT companies had comprehensive privacy programs. And the measures that they were taking were primarily compliance measures, while measures that stimulate stakeholder dialogue, for example, were quite rare. And this 2011 study classified online privacy as a new and emerging issue in CSR. Well, it most certainly has arrived here, fast forward 6 years, and it's one of the top CSR issues in both Australia and New Zealand. The protection of consumer and employee information from breaches of privacy is a corporate social responsibility. There is no doubt about that. This social responsibility is increasingly being tested, though, by an opposing social responsibility for many companies, especially those in the telecommunications, internet and banking industries, which is to contribute to the broader social responsibility of protecting citizens against acts of terrorism by allowing law enforcement and crime prevention bodies access to private communications. So again, we see here opposing dilemmas in the field of corporate social responsibility as it relates to data security and privacy. And I won't even get on to the issues around big data for marketing purpose, the rise of the cashless society, online voting and general elections, and all kinds of other arenas where business responses and government policy are becoming acute challenges. The second issue that I wanted to touch on was the finding that mandatory reporting is so well supported in New Zealand. And the figures speak for themselves, but what's the implication? Are we seeing these corporate governance guidelines as the thin edge of the wedge towards mandatory sustainability reporting? I know our experience in Australia, for example, a number of years ago when the Australian corporate governance guidelines introduced on a comply or explain basis, talking about what you're doing to encourage gender diversity on boards. It didn't take more than 2 years before pretty much the entire top 200 of the Australian Stock Exchange was complying with that, even though it was a comply and explain basis. So it's essentially become like a de facto mandatory standard. So will the New Zealand corporate governance guidelines become like a de facto mandatory reporting standard or requirement here in New Zealand? It mightn't be such a bad thing. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that mandatory sustainability reporting effectively promotes socially responsible managerial practices. And a study by Harvard Business School professors Yanis Yanu and George Serafim, who are very well respected in the business and society field, showed that mandatory disclosure of sustainability information leads to an increase in the social responsibility of business leaders, a prioritisation of sustainable development in the business, a prioritisation of employee training, more efficient supervision of managers by boards and directors, an increase in implementation of ethical practices by firms, a decrease in bribery and corruption, and an improvement of managerial credibility within society. Those firms that were reporting were regarded as more socially responsible. They also found that those effects are larger for countries that have stronger enforcement mechanisms and countries that are more developed. So that is why I am so optimistic about the changes in New Zealand leading to greater achievement by New Zealand companies in their understanding and management of corporate responsibility and sustainability issues. A more recent study by those same scholars just published last year concluded that companies who increased their sustainability disclosures, also increased their company valuation. So that's certainly something to look forward to. I did mention that we looked at the business case for sustainability reporting, and in New Zealand there are some small differences from Australia. New Zealand is the light green bar, and reporting helps you manage your regulatory impacts. I am worried that this is not reporting, this is actually the priorities, the issues. So I apologise for an error there in the slides, but this is the wrong graph, but the right one's actually in the report, so I'll leave that for you to have a look at. This is the business case for sustainability reporting with the dark blue in New Zealand. So it certainly does help to build reputation and contribute to brand positioning. But the big difference that I'm pointing to is down here near the bottom. Okay, improving investor engagement may be relatively low on these listed benefits, but look at the huge difference here between Australia and New Zealand. Also opportunities for efficiency improvements, much more being identified this year by New Zealand than by Australia, and better opportunities for risk identification and mitigation as well. Generally speaking, around the globe, the quality of sustainability reporting is improving, and this report published by KPMG's Survey of Corporate Responsibility Reporting, the most recent version of it, does show only a modest increase in reporting in the Asia-Pacific area, but big increases in the quality of reporting in terms of being able to define trends, identify risks, and clearly communicate and respond to risks. And I think that the focus of the NZX corporate governance guidelines on value creation as being the reason why one pursues sustainability reporting is likely to lead to these kinds of quality improvements in reporting here as well. The last thing I wanted to touch on is the global goal of gender equality, which is very strong here in New Zealand. It was also the #1 goal in Australia. But I just wanted to contrast the business priorities here. So the priorities here: gender equality, decent work and economic growth, climate action, good health and wellbeing, and responsible consumption and production, with the SDG dashboard. This is last year's dashboard. I believe the 2017 dashboard has just been published, but like a day after I prepared these slides, so I apologise for that. I'll make sure that Abby has the updated dashboard. It is a publicly available dashboard, but this is based on analysis of national statistical data, and the traffic light system simply shows where New Zealand is doing well, that's the green ones, where New Zealand is doing poorly, that's the red ones, and where there's not bad but room for improvement, which is the yellow ones here. And gender equality is one of the yellow ones, but I reckon it may not stay there for long, because the SDG scorecard for gender equality comprises 5 metrics: women in national parliaments, female years of schooling, female labour force participation, unmet demand for contraceptives, and the gender wage gap. And only the first of those, the proportion of women in national parliaments, gets a yellow dot. Everything else gets a green dot. So New Zealand is already doing pretty well, and I don't know if this year it'll go green, or perhaps that's a year or two away, but I feel quite optimistic about New Zealand's ability to achieve that. The other thing I wanted to mention about this SDG dashboard is that of the top 5 goals that are being prioritised by business in New Zealand, only one of them is actually consistent with national priorities. That is, I think that's okay, because business is there to serve the needs of its own stakeholders, not necessarily perform the role of the government, in fact not to perform the role of the government. But the only one where business priorities and I shouldn't say national priorities, because I don't know if this is a priority of the government, I hope so, but in terms of where things are doing more poorly for New Zealand is climate action. But as we saw, climate action is definitely on the agenda for New Zealand companies last year and this year. So we hope to see some good progress there. Finally, the CSR management capabilities scores that underpin the CSR top 3 are these 4 capabilities: stakeholder engagement, stakeholder values and impact, dialogue and social accountability. They are distinct but highly correlated capabilities. They are intangible. That's why we use perception-based measures to evaluate them. And they are derived from both the formal practices of the organisation and the formal policies and processes and structure of the organisation and the culture of the organisation. So this set of measures attempts to tap all of the above. And you can see a big jump in scores on most of these capabilities in New Zealand this year. Stakeholder engagement score is terrific, it's very, very strong, but the biggest jump is in those companies that report that they're doing better, doing well in terms of social accountability, which ties together with the increasing focus on reporting and disclosure, generally speaking, that we're seeing here in New Zealand. That's really all I wanted to say about that, apart from a fantastic vote of thanks to our partners here in New Zealand, and the heavy lifting has been done by Alison Hurft, Nikki Wright, and my team in Australia, but we're very, very grateful also to Massey University's support, La Trobe University in Melbourne, and Sustainable Business Australia. So I think there might be time for a few minutes of questions. And Nikki, are you going to moderate that, or will you just keep time? Or
I'll just keep time.
Yep.
We've got some microphones that can be circulated.
Yep. There you go.
If anyone has any questions, don't be shy. Andrew?
both. like being some kind of movie star. Okay. Look, thank you, Leora. That was really interesting. I guess more of an observation, but certainly from a large company, we're a listed NZX company, and the comment about the engagement with investors and really what's happening with reporting is something that we've certainly seen occurring. And one of the biggest motivation, or probably two key motivations that have caused us to take a more concerted effort on reporting, and Sarah behind me here is doing a lot of the legwork for our reporting this year again, is firstly the NZX thing, which really makes us much more of a focus from a board level. My observation on that is, when you take an ESG approach, environmental, social and governance, when you're dealing with a board of directors, they tend to focus on the G because they're governors, and that tends to become a rather big G from their point of view as well. But that's all part of the process, which is good. But certainly in terms of the way that investors, particularly institutional investors, want to engage with you, to be honest, we were getting sick and tired of every second week getting a survey coming from some big institution saying, can you please fill in this survey about your CSR policies? So having a more concerted report, which we can point to, actually is a much better and more efficient way of dealing with those sorts of queries.
Well, I'll take that as a comment rather than a question, but I absolutely agree with those sentiments. And I remember under CSR Connected, which we started 10 years ago, one of the earliest events that we organised was on the theme of investors as the new activists. And it's taken a decade to get to the point now where we're seeing the kinds of results that we have, but I still think that the best still lies ahead, and that companies are getting much more savvy around understanding and managing ESG issues, and investors are getting much more savvy around understanding the impact that this has on long-term value creation. That's another one.
This actually is a question, and it really relates to that thing about investors and activism. And one of the key developments that we've seen in New Zealand obviously is the growth of the KiwiSaver schemes, which is really, I guess, mandatory investment savings by small, ordinary New Zealanders, which are going into large funds, which then flow into companies. I know the Australian market is much bigger and more advanced in that process, by at least a decade or more ahead of New Zealand. And I guess one of the key things is most New Zealanders have often seen big companies and big institutions as being out there and not really relevant to them, whereas today, increasingly, more and more ordinary New Zealanders, their personal wealth and their long-term future is tied up in those investments, and getting a stronger link between the two, I think, is going to be quite powerful to that. And I want to get a sense of how that's been playing out in Australia. Are you seeing the institutions on behalf of the smaller investors becoming more active in the space?
The superannuation sector in Australia is a big driver of better responsible business practices across the board. But we're also seeing, and I don't know if it's happening here in New Zealand, the emergence of new, small, purpose-driven superannuation funds where it is 100% dedicated to positive social and environmental and economic impacts, and it's quite appealing to young people, and that's being married with technology, mobile technology, and that's a really interesting trend to watch. Yeah. Any other questions?
Hi, thank you so much, Leora. That was really insightful. I'm curious about this piece around sustainable development goals and how companies can map their strategies to better align with the goals. Are there any best cases or examples of this happening really well in Australia that we could be learning from, that you could share, or even New Zealand examples?
So what we found, the difference between last year and this year, and there's more detail in the report, was that last year companies were saying that they are mapping their strategies against the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, we're still seeing a lot of that happening, but more companies are starting to actually take action on the Sustainable Development Goals. This is a 15-year program, and we're still only just coming to nearly the end of year 2 since they were announced. So I don't have a lot of really great case studies yet on this, but one of the really encouraging things that we did find in this year was the level of awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals amongst the most senior levels of organisations is extremely high, and organisations are looking to map not just their sustainability strategies but their business strategies against the Sustainable Development Goals, which is for those of us who are committed to full integration of sustainability and corporate responsibility thinking inside a business, that CSR thinking, so to speak, should be business as usual, that is just magic to know that. So I think that in years to come we'll start to see some really some good cases. What I'm hoping to see is that new business opportunities will be developed as a result of applying the lens of the Sustainable Development Goals. Each one of those 17 goals has embedded within it enormous business opportunities to deal with the world's worst problems. And so I'm hoping that this will stimulate a lot of innovation in years to come.
Kia ora, Leora. Thank you for your insight that you provided us. Acknowledging the really strong connection and impacts that businesses have on a broader range of stakeholders, what parts of the survey, or are there plans to maybe use the survey as a tool to get insight and views on some of those non-business stakeholders and get them to provide their views on how they think businesses are performing?
We're always open to new ideas and suggestions on the methodology and the approach. The sample over the 9 years up until now has been like what you would call a purposive sample, or almost like a self-nominated sample. This is not a reflection of business as usual in either New Zealand or Australia. This is a reflection of the priorities of those organisations who are most interested and committed to working with responsible business practices. I'd love to be able to extend it more broadly, and if anyone wants to volunteer to help us get that going, please come and talk to me.
I have a question from Kat MacDonald from Opus, who's dialing in through live stream. Leora, Kat asks, are there any specific CSR practices, particularly in CSR reporting, that are happening in Australia that New Zealand could learn from?
Well, I'm wondering about the other side of the coin as well. What are you doing here that we can learn from? Some of the differences that I see between Australia and New Zealand is that GRI is probably more popular in Australia, and integrated reporting is making faster head of steam here. They're very complementary. I think with the release of the new GRI standards that we've got a superior and enhanced reporting tool to work with, and those companies in New Zealand that are not already engaging with GRI, I would recommend it in the strongest possible terms. It is the gold standard for sustainability reporting. It is continuously improved. It's easier to use than ever, and it is very much focused now, and it always has been, but there's more and more guidance coming out all the time on the topic of materiality. And both integrated reporting and sustainability reporting have a slightly different take on the question of materiality, but they're both derived from accounting ideas about materiality but applied to a broader field. And I think we're seeing some really interesting work being done in the field of materiality in Australia, particularly with companies looking to take a much longer term horizon, as much as a 10-year horizon, looking at their material issues and integrating them very strongly into business practice as usual. But look, there used to be like an urban myth or something like that, Australia was leading and New Zealand was lagging when it comes to all things sustainability. If that were ever true, it's no longer true. It is absolutely no longer true. The evidence from this year's annual review of the state of CSR shows New Zealand doing very well. It's a big yes from Abby there.
Hi there. Thank you very much for the report. It's really fantastic. I'm coming from a social service organisation, and in New Zealand, we see a lot of poverty, domestic violence, mental health issues, which are really, really high on the agenda. And I'm just wondering that the way these are reflected in the CSR policies or in the CSR report, I feel they're relatively minimal, except for obviously the gender equality. Is there any insights that you have as in response to that? Is the business wanting to take responsibility or more responsibility in that, or is that something that actually maybe is too frightening to touch as a subject matter? So we are veering away from it.
Yeah, it really comes down to how you define corporate social responsibility, and the definition. There are hundreds and hundreds of definitions, but the one I think that is that I like the best, that we use at ACCSR, is the one that was published by ISO, the International Organisation for Standardisation, in the ISO 26000 guidance standard on social responsibility, and that asks organisations to look at their impacts on society and the environment. So it is all about the impacts of the organisation. There is also a long tradition of scholarship in this area, and opposing views on what is the social responsibility of business, but the one that has always resonated most with me is the view that organisations are responsible for the issues of their own stakeholders, not for society more broadly. And I think this is quite consistent with the ISO 26000 definition of CSR. So it follows from that, if you buy into that definition, that companies that have a very, very broad social impact can pick up on these very, very broad issues as part of their social issues remit. So the companies that have the broadest possible impacts would be telecommunications, banking. Everyone needs access to a bank account. Everyone needs access to telephone services, possibly mining as well, because their products touch every part of society. So the broader the impact of an organisation, the broader its social responsibility, and the more degrees of freedom, I guess, they have to pursue a broad range of social issues. An impact of an organisation that is narrower and more specific may not pursue issues like homelessness or mental health or something like that unless they're connected to their business through their corporate social responsibility approach. But they may still elect to do that through their philanthropy. So, and I see a difference between corporate social responsibility and philanthropy. So there is no reason why any of these important societal issues cannot and should not be embraced by business. Absolutely no reason, except insofar as their understanding of CSR is tied to their own direct impacts. And if they do subscribe to that philosophy, then it depends on the nature of their impacts. If they don't, then they may be approached on a philanthropic basis like any organisation. That might be the last one, because we do want to have some award presentations.
Yes. Well, thank you for the presentation. I'm from Mass University, and my question is concerning the SDGs. Do you think that SDGs have become the common platform for business around the world? Is it becoming as common as you see, or what are the future prospects for the expectation for companies to be part of this? And also, how do you see Australia and New Zealand doing in terms of working with SDGs in comparison to other regions of the world? And how does that imply, what does that imply for New Zealand Australian business?
Okay, so to take the first one, are the SDGs becoming like a global platform for business? Yes. I don't know the extent to which it's being embraced by business in other countries, but I find it hard to believe that Australia and New Zealand could be total radical outliers compared to the rest of the world. It's something that I could take a look at. But certainly the SDGs were designed with deep involvement of business as well as civil society and government, and they are fit for purpose for business. The intention of their design is that they be a suitable platform for business. So I think that that's what business is seeing in both Australia and New Zealand. I would hope that that's true globally. It's certainly the intention of the Sustainable Development Goals to provide that big platform for global action. In terms of how are both Australia and New Zealand doing in the SDGs, there's a great publication called the SDG Scorecard. Both Australia and New Zealand, compared to the rest of the world, are pretty good in terms of being in the top 20 or 25 overall. But clearly there's room for improvement. Because even a country like New Zealand, which is up there in the top 20, 22, something like that, there's enough red and yellow on that traffic light chart to indicate that there's some very important priorities here to be addressed, and certainly those that are green are not to be forgotten about. They're green because people have been prioritising them. And should continue to do so. So, short answer to Australia and New Zealand's position is not bad, but can do better.
Thank you.
Okay. The time has gone really quickly, and so now Nikki Wright from Wright Communications is going to actually do the awards presentation for the CSR Top 3 in New Zealand.
Thank you, Leora. That was just very, very insightful. It's my honour now to present 3 companies with their awards for CSR capability throughout their organisation. And firstly, I'd like to welcome Tracy back to the stage and to receive her award for Westpac. Just standing up there, I'm going to ask you a question. Why have we got this award? The question I'd like to ask you, Tracy, is that gender equality has risen to the top of the SDGs for New Zealand, and there's been a lot of media publicity about gender equality in recent months, suggesting there's still some unbroken glass ceilings in some companies and industries. Can you tell us a bit more about Westpac's policy on gender equality at all levels of the business?
I would love to tell you more about that. But before I do, I would like to thank you for this award. I see it as recognition for work that Westpac has been committed to for a long period of time. We began our sustainability journey back in 2008, and it has been a firm focus for the business at all levels ever since that time. David McLean, our CEO, is a firm champion of this work. Our board recently met with our sustainability external stakeholder panel to discuss sustainability issues, and they are one of the key parts of the governance of sustainability within Westpac. We do have that in external view, and our stakeholder engagement is essential in shaping, where our focus lies. So there is that. So I see this as a two-part thing. One is about commitment, but it also is an acknowledgement of communication. This is where our weak point is and where our opportunity lies. So within sustainability, we know a lot about reporting, and we know the benefits that it gives to all of us with regards to increasing our focus on authentic and transparent actions. But what we're recognising as a business is that we need to communicate the right things to the right people at the right time. And we've been trying to use some of these sustainability reports to do a one-size-fits-all type of thing. So we are lucky to be part of a large organisation, and our GRI reporting happens is predominantly driven from our Australian office. So we have the opportunity to to communicate in a slightly different way. So we tested things with our first online sustainability review last year, and we did link into the SDGs within that, and that did increase our focus. It's another great communication tool, as was the survey for this. That was part of this process. There were conversations that came as a result of it. So every time we have the opportunity to discuss these issues, it increases the integration within the business, and these are all great things. So, I agree that we're in a golden age, and I too am optimistic, and I'm also really, really proud to be part of the Westpac family. I'm relatively new to Westpac, so I'm riding on the coattails of some awesome work that has gone before. But to come back to your question, diversity and inclusion is an absolute business priority for Westpac. We recognise that having a workforce that reflects the communities that we operate in is key to our business success. We have a vision of being one of the world's great service companies, and we are going to do that by helping the communities, customers and our people prosper and grow. So to me that says that we are here to serve our communities. So looking at where the impact that we have in answer to you know, what issues could be addressed. We have the challenge in that, as every organisation here does, I think that there are so many issues that we can face that the materiality assessment aspect of things is absolutely key. But so working out where we can have the most influence is an important part of our process. But our people have to be a core focus. How we deliver everything, they are they deliver on our service, but they're also one of our reasons for being. We are 4,500 people. We happen to be called Westpac, but we're a community that matters all by itself, and so we have to care for that community, and we have to treat each other well. So within that, we have a program that recognises that diversity and inclusion is important, and it's driven by our employees. So we have about half a dozen employee action groups that focus on different aspects of those issues. And one aspect is gender equity. We have a group called Equal that looks at what is required to inspire women, and at Westpac in particular, and assist them in achieving their goals in the workplace. So if we're going to have 50% of women in leadership, which is one of our goals, then we have to make sure that we're building women to have the capability to allow them to hold those roles throughout the business. So we have programs in place around development. We have programs in place that allow flexibility, that encourage flexibility. And we have our targets. So we set a target, I think it was back in 2010, to have 50% of women in leadership by this year. And we nailed it. We achieved that objective last year in 2016. And so I'm really proud that what we did about that was we upped our target. So we now have an objective of having 51.5% of women in leadership by September this year. And I think we're going to make that too. Now that's appropriate. Women represent 60% of our workforce. So, you know, we're not quite at equity yet. But in that regard, but we are, depending on how you cut it. And, you know, that's an interesting thing with statistics, isn't it? You know, lies and statistics. But we have achieved our objective. We have 50% of women in our leadership team, and we have a strong representation of women at our board level. So we are doing very well. So those are some of the things that we've done internally, but that potentially help break that glass ceiling. There isn't a sense of that here at Westpac, but it's been a long journey. We didn't arrive here overnight. You know, banking is, depending on which part of it, is seen as a bit of a male bastion, though a lot of our frontline staff are women. So it has been a relatively long journey, and so it's required policies and processes and changing mindsets. And one of the things that we've done to drive change and to acknowledge that there is such a thing as unconscious bias. And to break that down, there's been a real focus on that issue across the business. So every person at Westpac is expected to do unconscious bias training, which affects, obviously not only gender issues, but other issues relating to the communities that we deal with internally and externally. And that's something that I'm really proud of as a business. And the other parts of what we do within outside and into the community and facing into our customers, we've recognised the place that women have to play in society and recognise that maybe a standard banking product doesn't always work for all women all the time. So as of very recently, we have a person who is focused on women's markets. So we're identifying what those needs are. We're recognising that women are stable and loyal clients. They're great partners for us, but they need to be given the financial tools, information and networks that they need to succeed. So we are going to focus on that and ensure that we deliver that to them. It's a growth opportunity for us. But another key initiative is one that we work on with Shine and DV-free, is that how I say it? That's right. So Westpac has taken steps to ensure that all our staff who experience domestic violence get the support at work that they need to be safe. So part of that is our policy around special leave being given to people that are having to deal with domestic violence issues. So we are trying to, look at what we can do, but the beauty of this particular partnership is it goes beyond our business. And with Shine New Zealand, we have a free online domestic violence learning module that's accessible on Shine's website. So there's some more information about that at the back, and Holly Carrington is here and she can talk to you further about that if you'd like to look at how you can put that into your own workplace. So I work for an organisation where David McLean likes to say that he's lucky enough to have 50%, an executive team that is 50% male. And it's nice that things, that he's able to turn things on his head like that. But I'd like to thank you again for this award. The organisation will be proud of that. It is, collaboration and the sharing of information and our learning is key, and we're keen to learn from everybody here in the room. So thank you.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. There's a few things in there that sparked my interest. Unconscious bias training, I haven't heard any organisation doing that, so keen to talk to you afterwards about that. Right, I'd like now to invite Paul Carroll from Lexus New Zealand and on behalf of Toyota New Zealand in his role there as a senior executive to come forward and accept your trophy on behalf of Toyota New Zealand. Congratulations.
Thank you, Nikki. You got a question?
I do have a question for you. You
Right.
can't escape. Paul, Toyota, obviously being in the automotive industry, climate action is probably the #1 SDG goal for your organisation. Please tell us, if you don't mind, given that you are distributing and selling vehicles that are putting carbon emissions and NOx into the atmosphere, how do you mitigate against those emissions as a company?
Leora made a good point before, which was that the bigger your footprint, the bigger your responsibility. So we're the biggest car company. Well, we're the second biggest actually. Volkswagen's the biggest. They beat us last year, which is a little odd, but anyway. 10 million cars a year we produce, and our cars last longer than anyone else's. So we've got even a bigger corporate responsibility. So the headquarters in Japan drive this globally. So we have 3 really big goals that were announced last year, which you may have heard. They're quite large. I mean, in 2050, targeting 2050. 2050, the vehicle emissions of our vehicles that we make by that point will only be 10% of what they were in 2010. The second one is all our manufacturing operations, no carbon dioxide, 0. And the third is that all the parts and the freight that we do, that will be 0 carbon as well. And that filters down right into all the Toyota companies around the world. So all of our action plans and everything, we have our own action plans here which lock in to the 2050 goals and are reviewed every year with our regional headquarters. So it's typically Japanese. It's very specific and it's very broken down into the various areas. But as far as that goes for us, we have been reporting carbon for 11 years. We are Enviromark certified to diamond level, and our dealers, we force all of our dealers right throughout, and they're all individual businesses, we force them to be Enviromark certified as well. So most of them are gold or above, and we should be platinum the way we're going at the moment, shortly. So all of those things filter into all of our action plans. And the last thing I want to mention, just as a very brief overview, is hybrid cars, hybrid electric vehicles. We've been making hybrid electric cars for 20 years now. We were the first company to mass produce hybrid electric cars, and all of the technology in that is actually patented and given free of charge to other car companies who are all using our patents to produce electric cars and hybrid electric cars. And just in New Zealand, since 2003, we started producing or selling our hybrid cars in New Zealand. Forgetting about the used ones that come in, we've sold 8,500 of those hybrids now. And if you look at that in terms of carbon dioxide, that's almost 9,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide and 350 million litres of fuel that has not been consumed or emitted in that period. So it all adds up, all these little bits. So that's what we do. Thank you.
Now, don't forget your award.
Thank you.
Which, by the way, has been repurposed from salvaged wood, and this environmental inks screen printed on there. So, lastly, is there anyone from Air New Zealand who's made it here today? You're here, Lisa. Woo-hoo. All right, come on up. We're a bit worried about Lisa and whether she'll be able to get here from...
That's all right, on-time performance.
That's your... yeah. Right. Congratulations to you as well.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you very much.
I've got the best of you. Oh. Do you mind if I jump straight to the question?
Sure.
Okay. So, decent work and economic growth is the second most important SDG this year.
Yep.
How does Air New Zealand align the two together in your daily operations?
Right.
So decent
When
work.
you say second, is that what we? Is that
No,
what
New Zealand. So
New Zealand has
as a
rated
whole.
that? Right. Okay. Interesting. Great. Well, economic growth, decent work and economic growth. I guess as the national carrier of New Zealand, there's some important ways that we drive economic growth for New Zealand. Most predominantly, I guess, in tourism, which is now the biggest export earner for the country. So that's a big one. And for us, that's very much about how do we drive greater value from the tourism industry and how do we work with regional tourism organisations around the country to actually think about the ways that we can get more people into those destinations. Probably one example recently has been our Northland safety video that some of you might have seen. That's actually working with regions to try and understand how might we be able to promote that region and encourage more people to go there. And we're actually seeing that uplift, which is awesome. So there's obviously 21 other places we could be doing that, so kind of watch this space. Another big one obviously is export industry, getting exports, high value exports to international markets. And you probably don't think about it when you're a passenger in the aircraft, but actually there's a whole lot that sits in the belly of those aircraft in terms of fresh flowers, sustainable seafood that's actually going to big export markets around the globe. So yeah, getting more sustainable fish onto plates in Houston, that's something that we can do. And certainly when we go into those new destinations, we're all about how do we take trade for mills and actually try and showcase New Zealand products in those places. So decent work, I guess, there's a couple of points I picked up on Tracy's the very end of what you were saying around gender diversity. I mean, obviously, we also have a big program that's focused on diversity and inclusion. So how do we be a diverse and inclusive place to work? That's thinking about gender diversity, but there are other aspects to that, obviously. Ethnicity's one. We're certainly trying to embrace Māori culture more than we have in the past. We fly with a koro on our tail and haven't necessarily done that justice, I would say, throughout all of our history. So there's little things that we are doing to try and improve that. I think the other big things for us as an employer are thinking about critical risks in our organisation and how we ensure we keep one another safe. And obviously employee engagement too, which is a really big one, I think, if you're going to create a culture where new ideas can kind of bubble up and you're going to embrace innovation and certainly sustainability, you kind of need to have the right culture within an organisation and engagement levels to really make that happen. So yeah, a few ideas from me. Thank you very much for the award.
That's wonderful.